verifying the response from the sheep. And so it's not so much what I say, but what I do, or what he says. Not so much what I say, but what I do, or what he says. To know the identity of the shepherd. We said we know the identity of the shepherd. We have, then that also ascertains the identity of the stranger. That we know the identity of the shepherd, then we can also determine the identity of the stranger. And that's verse 5, where it says, a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers. Now, when I thought about strangers, I thought strangers is not so much not knowing the person as it is not knowing the voice. Not so much about not knowing the persons as it is about not knowing the voice. And I thought about when our children are growing up and we begin to tell them about strangers. And so there are relatives that they have that they don't know the person and they don't know the voice. But that person is really not a stranger to them because they're relatives. So it's not so much that they don't, it's that they don't know the voice. They don't know the voice. And so whenever we tell them about strangers, strange or an unfamiliar voice, we tell them, if you don't know the voice, you don't go to them. We tell them, scream, holler, get away, run away, find an adult that you know, get away from unfamiliar voices. So as the sheep of God, we are to do the same. Get away from unfamiliar voices. An unfamiliar voice, and I thought about, as we're in Genesis chapter 3, that serpent talking to the woman, that unfamiliar voice is a voice that contradicts what God says. He contradicts what God says will happen. He minimizes the consequences or makes it seem that it will not be like what God said it was going to be. An unfamiliar voice or a strange voice, it brings to question what God has said. It makes you second guess. It makes you question what God has said. Has God really said? An unfamiliar voice, it rewords what God has said. That it sounds the same, but it means differently. Will you surely die? God surely die was a spiritual death. Satan wanted to make it seem like it was an actual, right on the spot, physical death. An unfamiliar voice, it shows you a different perspective from what God has revealed. And it appears to your desire, your aspiration to obtain it from an alternative route. An unfamiliar voice appeals to the appeasement of your immediate satisfaction, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. It appeals to your immediate satisfaction and not so towards lasting fruit. And then an unfamiliar voice is going to lead you to action that's against what God has said. So determining the identity of the stranger, there's an unfamiliar voice and there's an unsettling presence. In verse 5, he says, a stranger they simply will not follow, but will flee from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. An unfamiliar voice. What he speaks is not what you previously heard. What that voice is speaking now is not what that familiar voice, that shepherd, has spoken to you before. The sound is something you haven't heard before. It's a strange sound, a strange voice. They said an unfamiliar voice, flee from it. He's resisted instead of receiving what that voice is saying. It says they will not follow. So they resist it instead of receiving it. And then secondly, the identity of the stranger, determining the identity of the stranger, is that there's an unsettling presence. It says they flee from him. That means that there was unsettled in their in that voice. There was an unsettling presence. So they flee from him. They fleed instead of followed. They scattered instead of gathered. Why? Because the sheep flee from unfamiliar voices, because to them, if it's not their protector, it's a prey. It's a predator. If it's not their protector, it's a predator. So if it's not their shepherd, then it's a stranger. So what you have taught your child when approached by a stranger to do is what God wants his children to do when strange voices appeal to them. Flee, run far away as you can. Don't stand there and entertain it. Then you are placing yourself in a position to be affected by it, to be influenced by what's being said. He says, flee from it. Get away. Don't even give ear to it. And I remember something Pastor said on Sunday that stuck with me. He said, listening starts with entertaining. Listening starts with entertaining. So that means that you have given it an ear, you've entertained it, and then that you entertain it, you begin to listen to what they're saying. So if the voice is coming from one who I'm not familiar with, then it's strange to me. Then I'm not going to even give ear to it. I'm not going to entertain it. I'm not going to even give it my attention. So my sheep, and we haven't even got to verse 27, but that is our focus verse. My sheep hear my voice. I know them, and they follow me. And so we are given to know that in starting out, we have to know the voice of the shepherd. And then knowing the voice of the shepherd, we can determine the voice of a stranger so that we can subscribe to the voice of the shepherd. And that voice be the one that we submit to. And that voice be the one that we follow. And any strange voice that comes, flee from it. Get away from it as far as you can, as quick as you can, because that is not the voice of our shepherd. And we know that it only wants to harm us, to bring us harm if it is not the voice